This time on the Plutopia News Network, Jon and Scoop talk about their internet radio show, Radio Free Plutopia. The dynamic duo also wax poetic about wax or vinyl records versus digital music, record shops, album covers, and much more.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Plutopia News Network podcast. As you may know, Plutopia News Network is a global news organization, kind of, and we have other things that we do. Those other things include a weekly live stream on Thursday nights at our YouTube channel, and Radio Free Plutopia, where my partner Scoop Sweeney, who is with me today, and I become DJs and spin platters. You got platters over there, Scoop?
The platters that matters, do I ever? If you look behind me,
I see.
That's a small portion of the collection that my wife continually lectures me about. Can you find another place for those things? I've got them all.
Well, and I notice you've got a bunch of vinyl plus a bunch of CDs back there.
Yeah, and the reel tapes as well.
And as I mentioned to you the other day, I've been on podcasts where there are guys who have like massive libraries of vinyl and CDs, wall to wall, and like big walls, stuff full of stuff. And I could have gone there easily because I was certainly building a huge library, but I eventually got rid of all of my vinyl. Or most of it.
I'd have taken it from you.
So I tend to kind of go with the flow of technology, and currently I'm certainly not listening to anything on vinyl since I don't have any, and I'm not playing CDs very much at all either. I'm finding everything online and streaming it.
Well, I'm doing all the above myself. As far as getting rid of any of the vinyl, I even have a lot of cassettes, and they actually sound pretty good because I have a professional studio cassette deck here that I record stuff on and dub stuff on.
Do you play them often?
Actually, I've transferred a lot of them to the radio station, and it came out sounding good when it was digitized. The recording stuff back then was pretty good, and if you got a good cassette, it was worth hanging on to. There were a lot of shitty ones, too. I mean...
Oh, I remember, yeah.
Shitty with a capital S, and... those usually just I would airmail them out into the trash can because they weren't worth keeping around. But I have a lot of those things. But I've experienced something that many people report to me having experienced as well, with having gotten rid of their vinyl and their 45s, their cassettes and CDs and stuff, and went to the download stuff. And I remember stuff that when they first started doing the Napster and LimeWire and all that stuff where you can just download anything. Yeah, I did that quite a bit when that first started. And then I realized how horrible some of those things were.
Yeah, low bit rate.
Yeah, but the other part of it was if you had a disaster on your computer, you didn't have the music anymore. and that I experienced that. I had some really nice stuff, and its computer died, and so did that part of my music collection. And I thought, well, maybe I should hang on to some analog stuff just in case, Russia flies over and unleashes a powerful, electromagnetic pulse and wipes out all of our recorded stuff. The analog stuff doesn't care. That's my paranoid fantasy anyway.
Though it could float away in a flood.
Yes, and I have friends who had that happen.
As do I. So yeah. I should mention before we get too much further into this that this episode of Radio Free Plutopia, which is just Scoop and I riffing, was inspired by our weekly Radio Free Plutopia broadcast, and our realization that it would be fun to have a podcast episode. Did I call it a broadcast? Radio Free Plutopia. It's a webcast, really. So we webcast once a week. We play music. And that it would be fun for us to have a podcast episode where we talk about music and kind of what we know about music and how we think about music, and maybe a little bit about how we put Radio Free Plutopia together. So that's kind of what we're doing here today, I think.
Yeah, this is the scene of the crime, because this is the exact setup that we use when we're creating Radio Free Plutopia. And it's challenging because the gear that I use wasn't really set up to do it that way. Because we come in on my Mac M1 here, which is a really nice machine. That's where the Zoom comes in, but I have to port that audio over to this other machine right over here where the broadcast software runs. And it just...
Is that a PC and not a Mac?
Yeah, it's a Windows 10 PC, and they have Mac software that runs it, but the particular package I use called Sam Broadcaster, it's been around quite a long time, doesn't really have a Mac version. There have been some Franken Mac attempts at porting the software over there, but it just didn't quite work. So that version died out. So we had to run the music part off of the broadcast software, and it has an ability to bring in our audio from the Mac here, and it's a bit of a Frankenstein kind of monster, but it works.
It works well most of the time.
Most of the time.
We did have a few crashes, especially before you upgraded a lot of your hardware.
Yeah, I was using
software.
I was using a strictly analog port over to the PC, and that really confused the broadcast software. So I ended up getting a really nice USB audio interface from Mark of the Unicorn, also known as Mojo, and they have made some great stuff, and it greatly simplifies the process, and it increases the quality of the audio. So yeah, I'm an incurable gear hound anyway. Give you a look at the scene of the crime. Oh, good. Go away. FaceTime. I hate that thing, and I can't get it to shut up. Let me see it here. It comes up anytime someone tries to spam me on FaceTime. I really don't want to hear from anyone in Laredo, because I don't know anyone in Laredo or wherever that was coming from. Anyway, what I was going to do is show you around what we use here with number 2 camera. And this is, this is the, I'll have to bring the software up. That's
the PC?
Yes, and this is Sam Broadcaster. It shows all the
cool
list of songs, and these are all the controls that I use. And this is Mr. Mojo over here, the new audio interface. And this is just a mass of stupid stuff that I have here. Like I said, I'm a gear hound. My wife calls me a gear whore. And I take offense to that, even though it is probably correct, because I've got all this stuff. I've got recorders, reel-to-reel recorder over here that I've had for quite a while. It finally gave up the ghost. And there's CDs, albums, 45s. They're all up. There's a bunch in that chest over there. That's the record washer that I use to wash vinyl. It's just like a nice washing machine, and only I don't put my clothes in it. I put my vinyl records in it, and it cleans out all the gunk that they tend to accumulate and makes them sound like brand new records.
You can't just put those in the dishwasher?
You could, but you might not want to play it afterwards. I know some people that handle. Let me get rid of this. I'm sure it's giving everyone vertigo. Just
Well, a lot of people are listening and not seeing, and I guess I should mention that what we're seeing is a bunch of equipment, and computers and devices of various kinds. A sort of bionic office that Scoop has. Well, studio. It's a studio, actually.
yeah, and I've always had a studio of one sort or another for years and years and years, just back to the radio days.
You sound kind of echoey right now.
Echoing. Oh, maybe that's.
I think you're coming through a different mic or something.
Oh, wait a minute here. There we go. How'd that?
It sounds similar to what it did.
Yeah. Well,
Could you sing O Sole Mio?
Oh, Sole Mio. Oh, shoot. I know what may be doing that. This is one of those technical things that.
It sounds kind of like you're in the closet right now.
Okay.
There you are. You're back.
Yes, switching cameras switched the microphone. We're back on the audio interface there.
So, in summary, you have a complicated system that where things can go wrong.
That's the nature of electronic gear. If it can go wrong, it probably will. But it's a lot of fun to play with it. Keeps me off the streets, keeps me out of your neighborhoods. So you should be thankful that I have all of this. It's a public service.
So, I should mention kind of how I had to prepare for becoming a DJ. When Scoop and I first started talking about doing Radio Free Plutopia, the radio stations that he has set up play music from his library. That's kind of the way the internet radio thing is set up. So you have to have the music in your library, right? So I had a lot of music on CDs. I mean, a ton of music on CDs. And the trick was to make those things streamable by converting them to WAV files. You could use an MP3 file if it's a pretty high quality MP3 file, or you could probably use it's just WAV or MP3, right? We can't really use any other formats.
I probably could if I messed with it. The WAV is the preferable source material because I'm old school in that producers always like to start with, anytime you're going to sample something down, you want to start with the best quality recording to begin with. And if you have to source it down to an MP3, which is a lossy format, then you want to start out with a WAV. And because if you start out with an MP3, you're going to source a lossy format to another lossy, to the same lossy format, and it gets kind of ugly sounding.
You don't have to scale these down for streaming, do you?
Yeah, well, the way it works is, all of my source recordings on the broadcast package, they're all WAV files. And it goes out, though, and is streamed out to Live 365, which is the hosting service. It goes out as a 320K MP3. And they downsample that to a 128K MP3, which is their standard. And I spent a lot of time talking to some of their techs, and they said, don't just start out with a 128K that's coming into us. Start out higher, and it ends up sounding a little bit better. And I'm always in favor of a little bit better as opposed to a little bit shittier.
So when I signed up to do the show with Scoop, I I like carried piles of CDs to my computer and ripped them using a piece of software that Scoop pointed me out to. What's it called? Easy Audio,
Exact audio copy.
Exact Audio Copy.
It's actually a German bunch that created this, and it's really nice. And it's once you get it set up, it's just bulletproof as far as getting you a really good, copy of your CD into whatever format you want, because they let you do it to WAV or MP3 or I think AAC or one of those.
Yeah.
They do it to the waves.
So I spent hours of time ripping the CDs to lossless WAV files, basically. And once I had ripped all of those files, I had a pretty good base to start. But I do also have a lot of music that I bought as MP3s, especially music that I got through a service called eMusic at one time. And eventually I started adding some of those in there. So we do have some things that in my library that I'm drawing on, I have some MP3s, but it's mostly WAV files. And the other thing was that I had been using, to listen to music for years, I had been using iTunes or Apple Music. And that's okay for kind of listening to music, and it has its advantages. But for what we were doing here, like programming a show, it just kind of wasn't ideal. I was looking for something a little different, and Scoop reminded me of Winamp.
Yep.
There's this application called Winamp. I don't think it kind of doesn't officially exist in a supported form, but there was a version of it that had been, upgraded and updated. I don't know how long ago, that you can still get online. And I was able to download that thing and install that. So I was spending hours ripping WAV files, and then I would sit down and spend some time programming a set of tunes to play on Radio Free Plutopia. And I was being reintroduced to this library of music I had, because I have slid into the practice of using streaming audio. I've spent some time using Google Play primarily and Spotify, but I use Macs and I use an iPhone, and I finally realized I should use Apple Music. And that has turned out to be a good decision. I'll explain that in a minute. But anyway, I had not really listened to many of my CDs in a long time. So now I'm reacquainting myself with my own music library. And back to the thing about Apple Music. Apple Music recently made pretty much everything in their libraries lossless. And when we talk about lossless, what we're talking about is you can lose some of the fidelity of a recording when it's converted to digital and compressed, especially when it's compressed. And they created these compression algorithms in order to make the files smaller so that you could fit more of them onto a computer back in the day when storage on a computer was maybe more expensive and harder to get. But now storage is kind of an easy thing. And now you also have a world where people are streaming 4K video movies with complicated soundtracks and streaming the whole thing from various sources online, and it's working fine. And given that, I think Apple realized, why are we using compressed files when we're doing these really high-end, fairly big dense files for for video, for streaming movies and things like that. So we'll just convert everything that we have stored for Apple Music, which is damn near everything that's ever been recorded. So all of that stuff on Apple Music has been gradual, maybe not too gradually. I don't know. It just sort of appeared for me. I started seeing lossless on those like album folders and files, and then I read something that explained what they were doing. So they've done that, and then they started introducing a thing called spatial audio, which is kind of based on Dolby Atmos, which is a very sophisticated surround sound system. It was built as a complex system for theaters that can use a lot of like speakers planted all over the theater and that sort of thing. And then there's a sort of simpler version of Dolby Atmos that is used for home theaters and, home receivers, that sort of thing. And Apple adopted Dolby Atmos and has been in the process of converting some of the albums that they have. It's not a huge selection yet, but it's growing. I think every day they add more. They call it spatial audio. If you don't have a Dolby Atmos decoder, it's still possible to listen to spatial audio and get the surround effect. It works just on a regular 5.1 system, but it's going to be even better if you have Dolby Atmos. And I have, a conventional 5.1 receiver down there, and I have rear speakers actually embedded in my ceiling. And I started listening to some of that spatial audio stuff, and it kind of blew me away. Then I also had Apple AirPods Pro. Those things are built to accommodate surround sound. So they will handle spatial audio, and they will give you the kind of full impact of spatial audio. So that's been another thing I've tried. So kind of the long story here is that streaming is starting to become the way that people listen to music. And algorithms, like Apple has these great algorithms that will offer me things to listen to. And somehow they have got deeply into my skull and figured out things I was listening to in the 60s that I don't even remember. And they've started popping those things up in front of me and say, oh, I remember that album. I'll play that,
Yeah, their algorithm is pretty spooky because I've experienced the same thing listening to Apple Music, and it's creepy sometimes. Sometimes it's just brilliant.
I mean, it's one thing if they're like watching your activity and figuring out from your activity what you might want to listen to, but it seems here that they're actually scanning your brain waves and getting into your memories. I don't really know quite how they're able to do that, but they seem to be.
I think it's just an educated guess based on, you have a profile that exists out there in the digital world, whether you want it to be there or not. And everyone with the wherewithal to afford that sort of data processing has a copy of you somewhere in their banks, and they're going to say, "Oh, it's John again. Well, let's see. Oh, he's this age, and he's done this, and he's done that, so he probably likes this." So
and how can you complain about that? I mean, they're reintroducing you to great music from your past, especially if you're a little bit nostalgic, which I sometimes am. But the two greatest streaming algorithms that I'm aware of online right now are the Scoop algorithm and the Jon algorithm. Those two are operating as wetware within our skulls, and we're using them to program really interesting and eclectic shows, like a couple of hours every week. And then we have those stored in an archive on Mixcloud. And the more we've done that, the more I've realized how unadventurous some radio stations, and I'm thinking of internet radio as well as standard radio, how they're not really very adventurous. But we can do whatever we want to because we're not depending on this to put bread on the table. We're just doing it for fun.
Yeah, that's the secret, though.
Yep.
From my life in radio, I started in radio in our hometown of Big Spring, Texas, back in 1963, and that's commercial AM radio. And you talk about commercial conservatism, that was the home of it.
Is that K Big or K Best?
K Best. The mic
BST, Big Spring, Texas, K Best.
on your radio dial. And I had the pleasure, though, of doing the 1 hour at the end of the broadcast day jazz show on AM radio in West Texas. Every time I told that to some of my friends in radio and music, they went, "You did what? How many listeners did you have? 3?" I said, "Well, yeah, my mom was one. She was a and
I would have listened if I'd known about it.
But we had an Air Force base there, and I had a great audience. And they were loyal because these were guys from all over the United States, and they were from places where jazz was actually a thing, unlike Big Spring, Texas, where it was a aberrant musical form.
Okay, I want to read a little bit from an article on Texas Monthly from February 1977. Let's see. Oscar Glickman's record shop in Big Spring neither advertises nor offers discounts, and Oscar figures if the Rolling Stones walked into his store, he probably wouldn't recognize them, much less stick their hands in cement. Yet phonograph record devotees from Snyder to Paducah to Sydney, Australia, and Paris, France know Oscar. He's the man with the records. Behind the red brick facade and the display case full of faded album covers and World War II memorabilia from his son's collection, the wooden floor building is a magical history tour of records. Where else do Lightning Hopkins and Ted Nugent posters coexist? Show me another shop where the twist section is well stocked and mambos and cha-chas are still categorized. And that's where Scoop and I grew up, in a town where one of the greatest record stores in the world was just kind of tucked away downtown.
I could probably reach into the rack of vinyl doom over here to behind me and grab a record, and there's a good chance it has a sticker from the record shop. And
yeah, absolutely.
Our late friend Ed Ward, that was one thing we connected on because he was a big fan of the record shop after having talked to so many people about where they got their records. And if you had a need for a really old, obscure record, you could probably find it, maybe not on the main floor of the record shop, because Oscar Glickman had a basement, and that's where the really cool stuff was. Everything they had ever purchased that didn't sell was in that basement. He didn't.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And they could always, anything you needed, if they didn't have it, they'd get it for you, but they probably had it somewhere.
Well, I knew his daughter, Martha, and she worked in the record shop whenever she was not in school. So I would also ways go in and try to chat up Martha so that maybe I could get a deal on a record. I never did, but I tried.
It's good to try, right?
Yeah,
can't lose anything.
And she would say that they had tried to clear out some of the stuff, and Dad was not going to have it. It's like, somebody's going to come in and want that music. And he was right, because when they finally closed, John from Village Music in Mill Valley, California, one of my other favorite record stores that our friend Ed introduced me to, he came out in a couple of big rental U-Hauls and hauled off all the stock that he could buy, and it was a lot. And
man, and he probably still has some of it.
Yeah, he ended up, I think, selling a lot of it online because he had to find, I think Village Music finally, came upon hard times along with most record stores. But we're really lucky in Austin to have some great record stores. We have Waterloo, and then my favorite, Antone's. I go to Antone's like some people go to church. You know, I'll put on my Sunday go to meeting clothes and go in there because I don't want to look geeky or stupid when I go into a cool record store. So I have to get the right rock and roll shirt on.
And you know, there's so much more music and so many more albums available now. So any store like that you go into has a curated selection. But with Oscar Glickman, he was like buying at least one of every record that was released.
That's right. And that was
no real curation, just buy everything.
Yep.
So I want to mention a memory that I have. First record I can recall ever buying is like a 45, and it was probably back when I was a kid in the 50s, you know, especially the early part of the 50s. So a lot of us didn't even have television sets yet. And the equivalent of Saturday morning cartoons was on radio. They would have Saturday morning kids shows. And you could also buy 45s, and you could get 45s with like Bugs Bunny or Bozo the Clown or whatever. So my first experience of going into the record shop was my mom taking me in there and buying, I think that bought a couple of like 45, it was actually a set of 45 records that would be like Bozo the Clown's Tour of the World, or there was another one that was Bugs Bunny. There was a Woody Woodpecker. We had several of those things where we just had these records that it was sort of like a cartoon on a record. But what I remember about that, and what I remember about the record store, is not just, you know, you went in and there's a lot of records, but the smell of the place. You could smell the records. You could smell the record sleeves, the record covers. They had and you don't get this anymore with digital and with CDs and so forth, but those cardboard record covers had a distinct kind of odor and feel to them. And you just don't find that anymore. But that was one of the things that I really identified with records in general back then. It was not so much just hearing the record play, but also like holding the record and looking at the album cover and smelling the smells and having the whole sensory experience of having the record. And you know, people today, some people listening to our podcast right now have probably never had that experience because this was before their time. But it was a great way to get into, you know, the world of music, because it wasn't just music; it was a whole sensory experience.
Yeah, the album cover, and some of those have been hailed as great art, and they really were. Some of the album cover artists, you know, just created amazing visual masterpieces, and I always loved, you know, getting that record, bringing it home. You put it on the record player, and you sit there and listen, and you read the notes. A lot of times there was a nice write-up by someone, a critic or someone, or a musician explaining the record or talking about the recording. And then the cover was always something really, some eye candy that was really good at drawing your attention in the record store. That was the whole purpose of having a really dynamic-looking album cover. They wanted it to stand out because you're competing with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and in some record stores, thousands of other record covers. So you had to really stand out, and some of the stuff was garish to the point of being, you know, hard to look at, and others were just, like going to an art museum. You would see some beautiful illustrations, and even the photography on ones that had a photographic album cover. The photos were done by really great people, Annie Leibovitz, and that category of people who really took some pain, went to a lot of effort to get a really perfect photo of the artist, and they could convert that to an album cover, and there's some beautiful ones like that. But I just loved it, going into a record store and just looking at the album covers. And I would probably be chairman of some great corporation if I had not wasted a whole lot of time in music stores just going through it. Probably could have gone out and gotten a doctorate or something, but no, I was in the record store thumbing through the albums.
If we were smart, we would have got more of those albums and salted them away somewhere, sold them as collector's items sometime in the far future, as in right now.
Yeah, my estate's going to have to do that because I don't get rid of any. I have every record I've ever either begged, borrowed, or stolen, or bought. But they're all here somewhere in the house, and the only ones I don't have are the ones that were stolen. I had a few friends walk off with some prized records, and if I ever find that person, I'll probably sacrifice them to the music gods. But that's right up with the murder. Stealing a record, I think, is a capital crime.
Back in like '68 or '69, when there was a sort of marketplace starting to emerge on the drag down by the University of Texas, where people would stand out there and sell stuff, right? And some people were selling things that they made or that they grew or whatever. I mean, it was a fairly diverse little marketplace that started growing down there. They eventually blocked off 23rd Street down there for the market. But when that first started, I went down there with my friend Jim Whitaker. For beer money, we would stand there and sell off a few albums. I had all these albums, and a lot of them I didn't listen to that much. So we would just go down there and stand there and sell them for a few bucks and then go buy some beer.
That sounds familiar. Our friend Ed introduced me to, as I mentioned, Village Music in Mill Valley. That's when we were both getting hundreds and hundreds of albums every week from all the record companies because we were music journalists. Ed was with Crawdaddy, I was with Zodiac News, and we would get some horrifying stuff that you wouldn't even want to use as a drink coaster. So we would take them into Village Music. It's the statute of limitations has expired, I'm sure. And John would take them in and give you $1 credit for each of those albums that you could apply to getting one of his albums from his great collection of it. And I got some great music in exchange for some horrible, one-time only releases by some nameless musician. And I feel kind of guilty about that because I've known a lot of musicians who, had that one record. Me included. We had our one record for A&M Records when I was managing the band Vital Signs. It came and went, and that's fine. But it was sure nice to be able to trade all of those horrible ones for a really nice collection. And so a lot of my collection came from a fair trade.
I see some guys who have, as I say, their walls are just lined with records, and I just wonder if they ever get a chance to listen to any of those records anymore. I mean, if you have thousands of records, how are you ever going to find time to listen to them? So I think a lot of it is somebody buys a record, they listen to it a couple of times, and then they stash it, they put it in the wall or whatever. And now, today, if you have music you're interested in listening to, you don't go buy the records, you go online and stream it, right? You're unlikely to even ever buy the record. And I know I bought records, probably a lot of records that I didn't listen to more than a couple of times, but I wanted them. I really wanted them. I wanted to hear them. And the only way I could hear them was to buy them.
Yeah, I'm one of those throwbacks. Shows. I really do listen to a lot of this stuff, which makes my wife disappear to the computer game room, and she hopes that I will eventually stop, but I usually don't because I like to play a lot of this stuff. And there's, I'm sure there are plenty of albums that I haven't touched in years, but there's always that thing. It's like you'll think about an album and you go and find it and then you go play it and you put it into the rotation. I have a section of records that I play a lot. It's just, old favorites. But it's just nice to, I like the sound of vinyl, even though you might hear a click or a pop. I mean, that's what vinyl was all about. Your favorite record might have a click where your sister dropped a glass on it and made a scratch, but that's okay. It's a reminder of your sister and her clumsiness. Or your own clumsiness from having dropped a cigarette butt onto a record. So you can't play that one track, but the rest of them are okay.
Well, I think I mentioned this yesterday. The thing that always bothered me about it was having to get up and turn over the record.
Oh, that was the only exercise I got was getting up to flip the record. Sometime I would have to do it on my hands and knees because I was chemically incapacitated, so I had to crawl rather than walk. But I got over there and flipped the record, and it was my exercise for the day.
Well, there are some things that you do while you're listening to music that you don't want to stop doing to turn over the record.
In that case,
just to mention it.
It gives a great rip back beat when it gets that and if you keep think about it, things you might be doing that would be helped by having a nice little rhythm section going and I've done that many times. You don't want to get up and go across the room in that situation. If that, I'm talking about having sex while you're listening to
Oh, I didn't mean that at all. No, I was talking about having sex. You caught me.
But, rock and roll music in general actually saved my life because back when I was doing the journalism thing, I was covering a lot of really heavy duty and oftentimes, depressing stories. And I got to a point in the mid 70s, early 70s when I just was starting to lose it. Yeah, I did a book where I had to, I did a chapter for a book where I had to research political assassinations for the years 1776 to 1976. And that really depressed me, and I was starting to lose.
Oh, yeah.
And Zodiac News said, why don't you take over as music editor? 'Cause my dear late friend, John Newhall, who was the creator and publisher of Zodiac, knew that I was becoming overworked with all of that depressing stuff. So I started doing that, and it really, brought me into a whole different mindset because I've always loved music. And getting to work at music and getting free records and going to every concert that I wanted to definitely saved me, and it directed me when radio finally fell apart. I went into working with bands. I'd always dreamed of being in a band, and I can't carry a tune in a bucket, but I do business pretty well. So I helped a lot of bands in the Bay Area do their thing, and that was a great change in my life. So rock and roll saved me, John.
Why do we like it so much?
I have no idea. It's a tribal thing, I think. It goes back to our cave person days when we were beating on rocks with the sticks and dinosaur bones.
Shamans playing their drums.
It's that backbeat. It's that Charlie Watts of the caveman days.
Ah, yes, Charlie Watts. I'm going to miss Charlie.
Talk about a great musician who didn't act like a rocker.
Yeah.
He was the ultimate rock and roll drummer, but he was a man of fashion, a man of style, a family man, a man that did not indulge in all the general bullshit that a lot of famous musicians seem to always do and get in trouble with. He didn't do those, but he did great drumming.
I wish that, but what I started to say is I wish that I could see the Rolling Stones again. But I've been thinking about that. And in fact, today I had to go somewhere and was driving along and looked up and saw a billboard that said Rolling Stones, November 20th. So they're coming. They're going to be here. They're going to play in Austin, but are they really the Rolling Stones that I used to love? It's these are like guys who I mean, they've changed over the years. They're just not the same guys. And they're old. I'm old. I can relate to the fact that they're old, but I'm not sure that I'm going to enjoy listening to them play as much as I would have in the past.
Yeah, I used to think that too, but there's a documentary out online. I can't remember the name of it. It's about the Rolling Stones South American tour a few years back, and it spends a lot of time with Keith Richards and the band members when they're not on stage and what they're looking into. And they were, hanging out with local musicians in South America and Cuba and places like that. And it gave you a good view of that. And maybe they don't sound as you would remember them, but they're still the same person with a lot of years added on and a lot of experiences. And you get to kind of see a bit of why they are what they are, because these guys really care about music. They do a lot of stuff in public that gets a lot of press, but behind the scenes, they're still about the music, and that's the same with a lot of long-lived bands. They're never the same as they were from their first hit record, but they involve, like any human endeavor. You're never the same. I'm not the same person I was 50 years ago.
I'm certainly not.
Evolved. I've mutated. I definitely mutated, but it's just the way of life. I would love to hear the original Rolling Stone with Brian Jones and
Oh yeah,
Bill Wyman, all those guys. But they're not around.
yeah. That would actually be a pretty good lineup: the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, the original Rolling Stones and the original Beatles. And we may yet get to see that lineup, but it won't be here.
Yep. They're gathering over there on the other side of the Rainbow Bridge, but I'm not rushing over there anytime soon. I'm enjoying it over here on this side of the bridge, so we will see.
And we've mentioned a lot about the rock and roll that we've been playing, but we've been playing other kinds of music, especially jazz. I really like to play jazz. Some of those jazz numbers are pretty long, but we're starting to work more of those into our repertoire.
Yeah, I love music if you look at my collection, it's not all rock and roll. There's a lot of rock and roll here, but I have country, I have a lot of classical music. I worked at some stations that played classical music. I even have a lot of elevator music, or what people would call elevator music. It's smooth, easy stuff. Sometimes I'll play that.
Lounge music.
I have a lot of folk music. My first big craze was folk music when that was a big thing in the 50s and early 60s. So I still have a lot of that. And I just like music. It just makes me feel good.
Yeah, I guess it's a way that we relate to each other and communicate. I mean, music is a form of communication. If you watch a jazz band playing, you're actually watching a bunch of guys stand on stage and have a conversation through their instruments.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we do with our Radio Free Plutopia. You and I have similar taste in some ways and very different taste in other, and it's great to riff off of each other and kind of throw stuff at each other that the other doesn't expect, and that's fun to do. Just like, well, you played something weird that I never heard. Listen to this, and I'll throw something at you, and that's fun.
And I had this this thought that when we started doing this, that I should kind of give a little bit of history of each tune or set it in some kind of context. So a lot of our conversation has been like that on the show. And I went through a short period at the beginning where I said, should I really be doing that? Are we gabbing too much? Should we just play more music and talk less? But then I was listening to, I like to listen to Little Steven's Underground Garage on
Oh, yes.
Sirius XM, and they do that. He does a great job of explaining in detail the context for a particular song. And I realized that people don't really get that very much, and maybe some people aren't interested. Maybe they'd rather just hear the music, but I realize just for me, I kind of like hearing that stuff. I like to know where the song came from, and um, you know, sometimes it's good to, or it can be interesting to hear who played on a particular song. Yesterday, we played at the end of the show. We played a song called "Feel Flows" by the Beach Boys, and that was actually mostly by Carl Wilson, who was Brian Wilson's brother, one of the Beach Boys. And in researching that, I discovered I had never really known. I knew there was some saxophone and some flute on that album, but I didn't really know who played it. And it was Charles Lloyd, and I'm a fan of Charles Lloyd. And
Yep.
there he was.
The Beach Boys, because they were all into transcendental meditation at that time. And I have played a Charles Lloyd album on the show several times. And one of the things is the Beach Boys, the classic Beach Boys vocals behind Charles Lloyd in a tune called TMI. And it's talking about transcendental meditation.
That's probably how they connected, really, through TM.
Yeah, and there were a lot of musicians that were into that, and they kind of were speaking the same language, even though they were into different kinds of music. And that's how music is. It's not, if you are a really good musician, you don't just only go out and see other rock and roll. If you're smart, you're going to go and stretch out and learn from all the forms of music that are out there. I've known a lot of musicians that were just that way. If they were a rock musician, they didn't just go to rock shows. They'd go see jazz, go see blues, go see, Americana stuff. And you pick up stuff that you can incorporate into your own music, and that's really important.
And every month, every week, really, there's tons of new stuff being released. It's amazing how much music is like flooding through the streaming systems now every week, and I'm constantly kind of looking out for interesting new stuff. We talked a little bit on the show yesterday about how fond I am of Mojo magazine, which is a magazine from the UK, but they write a lot about music from the USA, and they write about old rock and roll, but they also have a section where they review new music. And the way that I actually started building my knowledge of music and my library of music early on was through reviews that I read in Crawdaddy and in Rolling Stone. And I'm having that same experience with Mojo. I've found that it's a trusted source, that it aligns pretty well with my taste in music, and that I can really find great stuff on there that I might never otherwise have discovered.
That's great. I'm going to have to get hold of Mojo because it sounds like they speak my language. And, I've been pretty lazy about going after new music. I have so much already that I just enjoy going through and finding stuff that I'd forgotten all about. I was listening to Hank Williams the other night, and that's very uncharacteristic of me, but he was actually credited with being an early influence on rock and roll. Some of the stuff that he did, some of the guitar licks that were on his record when he was doing electric, country music, were picked up by a lot of rock musicians because he was a great guy, and unfortunately he fell into some bad habits that killed him. But he did some interesting music. You have to be into country, I guess. But I worked in some country stations. I've worked with a lot of country artists, doing concert production back in the '90s and early 2000s. So I've learned to speak the tongue, I guess, and I kind of understand where rock and country kind of come together, because when country music started getting really big and really rock and really electric, a lot of the rock musicians were transitioning over to playing the country bands that were doing big concert work, and I encountered that a lot. So, don't limit yourself to just one type of music. You have to spread out and see what's out there.
Actually, while you were saying that, I also thought of the one thing about listening to old music is that some of it is just so classic that it's never going to get old, and you're always going to just love listening to it, and you're always going to find new stuff in it. And that's particularly true in my case of Miles Davis.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a huge Miles Davis fan. Bitches Brew is one of my favorite albums, and I have the extended Bitches Brew album recording, which has sessions. It includes sessions that were not released on the original album. There's so much. It's so rich, so much in there, and you could listen to those things over and over again for days on end and still find new stuff.
Yeah, I have to credit my older sister Dee, who passed on a long time ago, but she was the one that influenced my music, because she was 4 years older than me and way hipper than me. And as a kid, I was just clueless, and she gave me many clues. She introduced me to rock and roll, but she also introduced me to jazz. She got hold of a few Dave Brubeck albums, and that was, an interesting departure from what I was used to hearing. So I listened to that stuff, and it's an acquired taste. A lot of jazz purists kind of sneer at Dave Brubeck because he was a little more white bread than they expect, but he was that was a great group, and I listened to that. She introduced me to rock and roll. She introduced me to Roy Orbison, and so I just got into all sorts of things. I discovered folk music, and so I got a little something from every type of music that I've encountered, and it just depends on my mood of what I'm going to listen to.
Yeah. Well, I think we're about at the end of the hour.
Yeah, we're closing in on it there, so we just need to tell people. We do a lot of things. Radio Free Plutopia is one of them. The other one is a live thing we do on YouTube every Thursday evening. This is a Thursday when we're recording it, so we'll be doing that tonight. And then we do our weekly podcast, and you can go to plutopia.io and find our source material right there. We have all of our podcasts up on the Plutopia podcast site and on YouTube. On our YouTube channel, we posted all of our podcasts and our live broadcast.
And our music is all archived on Mixcloud.
Right. We're everywhere. We're everywhere.
And, there's more and more every week. So there's a great body of work out there, and we really hope that you'll check it out. And if you're interested in supporting our efforts, there is a way to become a subscriber to Plutopia News Network. We don't have subscription-only content yet. We might in the future. We really haven't pushed subscriptions very much, but we are set up with Patreon, which allows you to click through and subscribe for as little as $2 a month. Or, you could pay thousands of dollars a month, but $2 a month, that's something.
We have merchandise. If you're looking at this on the video recording of this session that we'll be posting on YouTube, you can see I'm wearing a Plutopia t-shirt. Very fine. It's available in black or in a black t-shirt. And we have a coffee cup, and we have a bumper sticker. So, we'll get to you one way or another, so come on down. We're not giving it away, but we'll make an easy pay plan for you.
Or an easy play plan.
I can't talk now.
I think an easy play plan is a good idea.
My mouth needs more coffee.
It should be easy to play. All right. See you next time. Well, I'll see you tonight.
Later, Tater.
All right. Adios.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lubkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.